Okay, I've got a crazy idea. What if you actually knew what to feed your baby when you came home from the hospital with a baby? In today's video, that's exactly what we're gonna talk about. I'm Rainey, a dietitian and lactation consultant, and today we're looking at newborn feeding basics from birth to about 4 weeks. After 4 weeks, I feel like it's a totally different ballgame. So for the purpose of this video, we'll do birth to 4 weeks. We'll look at colostrum and stomach size. We'll look at feeding frequency and just meeting baby's needs and how to know if you're meeting baby's needs. And then also we'll look at recognizing hunger and fullness cues. So I'm a lactation consultant, so a lot of this video is going to be from a lactation perspective, but we'll talk about formula feeding too. They're just a little bit different when you're talking about the first few days to week. So first up with breast milk, a lot of people ask me, why isn't there milk coming in? And when you talk to them, it's like day 2. Well, it's good to know that your milk doesn't actually come in for about 3 to 7 days, depending. What happens is when you have a baby, something called colostrum is ready to be expressed and for the baby to take, but it's not your full milk supply. So in the first day, when you have a baby, you want to make sure you remove colostrum from your breast by either the baby or pumping within the first 3 hours, maybe 5, but 5 is kind of a stretch. So if for some reason you're separated from your baby, you still want to make sure you get that colostrum out, because that's going to signal your body to make more. And so from that point on, breastfeeding really becomes supply and demand. So colostrum is a thick yellowy substance, super concentrated, full of nutrients, enzymes, proteins, and things that help the baby's immune system grow stronger and stronger. So it's a small concentrated amount. It's not a huge amount. And I think that really can give you peace of mind. Knowing a little bit goes a long way. Also, it's important to know your baby has eaten and gotten nutrients from you the whole time it's been in the womb. So it's not really starving when it comes out. It's still got some nutrients left over. So it really just needs a small amount. When you're looking at colostrum, it's important to know it's super nutrient dense. So that's why it's sufficient for your baby, but also your baby's stomach is really small. The first 1 to 2 days, baby stomachs are about the size of a marble. So they don't need a huge volume. That's about 5 milliliters of colostrum that your baby would need. Now, because it's only getting a small amount, it'll eat more often. So before I had a baby, I would tell people, yeah, you should eat about 1 to 2 ounces every 1 to 2 hours. So about how long you could go in between feeding is about how much your baby took. The thing about breastfeeding is you don't always know how much they take. And also in the first 2 weeks of life, they really latch every hour, on the hour, day and night. That does get better, but it's important to know the more they're latching in the beginning, the longer, the better your long-term breastfeeding success is going to be. So as exhausting as it can be, if you can make it through those first 2 weeks of the constant latching, you'll really have more breastfeeding success long-term. So that's something to keep in mind. So by day 3, the stomach grows to about the size of a walnut. So while you were looking at a marble and about 5 milliliters of breast milk, now you're looking at about 20 to maybe 30 milliliters, or about 1 ounce of breast milk. At that point, 1 ounce, the baby could likely go a whole hour without eating. But if you think about feeding, it still feels like you're doing it all the time. Let's say they latch and feed for 20 minutes. They play, which means they're like staring and looking around, and then they sleep again. You're really kind of, breastfeeding all day, all night. So again, that's really look at what the first 2 weeks look like. By the first week, the stomach's about the size of an apricot. So the volume's getting bigger and bigger, and you can be able to start to go longer stretches in between. By if about 2 weeks, you're not able to make it 2-hour stretches, there might be something else to look at. You'll probably be aware of something else to look at earlier on than 2 weeks though. That's about 60 mils, so the size of an apricot is about 60 mils, and that's by 1 week. By the end of the first month, the infant's stomach is more like an egg, so then you're looking at closer to 150 milliliters. It depends though. My personal experience was my baby ate 2 ounces every 2 hours for about as long as I can remember. So everybody varies a little bit, but I think it's just good to know the stomach sizes so that you don't feel like you have to have this full volume of milk from day 1. Now, around the 2nd to 3rd week, you really want to look at your daily volume. By then you should be making about a 24-hour volume of milk. What happens is once your milk starts to come in by day 7, sometimes 5, sometimes 3, it depends on the person, but by day 7 your body will start pulling in extra water to make that full milk volume. So you're going to get that mature milk. And at that point, you should be able to have like a 24-hour supply, and it doesn't grow a lot from there. It kind of is just very consistent. And so that's when supply and demand really takes over, and whatever your baby is telling your body it needs, then your body is going to make. So if for some reason you're not breastfeeding your baby every time the baby eats, so maybe your partner is helping you or you've gone back to work or something, you still have to remove that milk. So if you go 3 hours and your baby gets a bottle, so let's say you do a formula bottle or a pumped breast milk bottle, but you don't remove milk at that same 3-hour mark, it's going to start to downregulate. It's going to tell your body, hey, I don't need this breast milk, so we're not going to make it anymore. And you may struggle with a long-term milk supply. We're not going to go super in detail in this video. We're going to look at what comes next. So far, we've talked about understanding newborn feeding basics. We talked about colostrum and stomach size. And next up, we're going to look at feeding frequency and baby's needs. So we kind of talked about feeding frequency already, but sometimes, when you're tired and you just had a baby, like 1 to 2 hours, like time is a blur. You're not really sure what time it is, what's going on. A lot of people like to keep track of this. I think breastfeeding is where, if you're a type A person, you have to think about letting go of a little bit of control, because it just isn't something that babies are not on our schedule. They're not really on our controlled schedule. So babies are very good at regulating it themselves, but we kind of have to start listening to that and letting the baby take the lead. Typically, there's 8 to 12 feedings a day. Like I said, for the first week, there's definitely closer to like 24 feedings a day. By the second week, you're getting closer to the 12 mark, and you can keep going from there. By the 4th week, a lot of babies do get to 8 times a day, so every 3 hours. I really think I see that more past the 4th week though. So I would still expect every 2 hours up to that 4-week mark. And then it just depends on different factors, whether or not your baby can make it, 3 hours if they take. So in general, you're going to have about 8 to 12 feedings a day, and that's really going to be closer to that 12 feeding mark, especially for those first 4 weeks. And then for how do you know your baby is hungry or if your baby is full? Something that I learned was called the wake window. I took the Taking Care of Babies course, and I can link that down below, but it was great at just explaining like this is what a baby does. And so they typically wake up, right, and they eat, and then they play. So like stare, look at you, goo goo gaga, whatever they're gonna do, and then they go back to sleep. I always thought they ate and then went to sleep and ate and went to sleep. I kind of thought that's how things worked, and I mean it might sometimes, but a lot of babies feed and then play and then sleep. So once I knew that, why that's important to me for feeding is if your baby's crying, wakes up, you feed it, right? And then your baby plays, which stares, plays with you, whatever, and then it starts fussing again. It's important to know it's probably tired at that point. A lot of people will try to feed it again at that point, and it can create some frustration and friction with breastfeeding. It's like, why won't my baby take this? And it's like, well, he wasn't really hungry. He was just sleepy, right? So kind of knowing that can kind of help set you up for success from the beginning. To know that, now is when my baby should be getting sleepy, not necessarily hungry again. And sometimes they're hungry again, but you'll find out. So what are hunger cues? Hunger cues are when your baby is trying to tell you in their own little way that they are actually hungry. So they might clench their fist, open their mouth, rooting, which means they're moving their head from side to side, or one side just looking for the breast or the bottle, bringing hands to their mouth, putting things in their mouth. When they're under 4 weeks old, they're probably not putting things in their mouth, but bringing their hand to their mouth, or, just overly fussy. Fists could be clenched. It's important to recognize your baby's hunger cues from the beginning. Especially with breastfeeding and sometimes with bottle feeding, you have more success if you don't wait until your baby is overly hungry, so they're cranky or hangry. And the reason for that is when a baby's breastfeeding especially, they have to, suckle at the breast to try to work hard to get the milk to come out. You may not have a letdown for a few minutes. And so it's not like from a bottle where you put it up and they're kind of just like guzzling from the beginning. They don't have that instant satisfaction. So they have to work a little bit harder, especially at the breast. And so if they're overly hungry and having to work really hard to feed at the breast, then they become frustrated, and it can be frustrating for both the mom and baby. Looking at those hunger cues, but also looking at fullness cues. So like if a baby starts to slow down, their fists get more relaxed, maybe even they do fall asleep, which is totally fine. Especially in those early days, you're not going to create like an association with like falling asleep at the breast in the first few weeks. Learn those in the first few weeks. Also, don't feel bad if it's hard for you to recognize what is what. You'll start to learn and you'll get better at your baby's rhythm. It's important to know you're new at this and your baby's new at this. I can remember at like 4 weeks old, I was kind of stressed because she felt like my baby had an upset stomach every time she would eat. And so I would like almost dread feeding her. And I asked my pediatrician about it, and he was like, honestly, her body's just new to this and new to figuring everything out. And sure enough, a week later, it was all totally fine. So sometimes it's just that reassurance of knowing this, reminding yourself this is just new and everybody's still trying to figure out what the heck we're doing here. So totally fine. So overall, we talked about newborn feeding basics, colostrum and stomach size, feeding frequency, and what to expect. But how do you know if your baby is not getting enough? From the very first pediatrician visit, they'll start to assess your baby's weight. So weight gain is going to be the main way you know if your baby is or isn't getting enough breast milk or formula. And so in the beginning, you kind of have to trust the process and know that if you're feeding on demand, if you're breastfeeding, or you're giving these bottles every time your baby needs it, if you're formula or bottle feeding, typically the process works out. There are instances where your baby is having trouble gaining weight, and you'll have to talk with that about your pediatrician. Another way to know is dirty and wet diapers. A baby typically should have a wet diaper for just a day of life. So let's say they're 4 days old, you're looking for 4 a day. Breastfed babies tend to have a bowel movement after every feeding session. It can also help you know that they've taken in breast milk at that time. Formula fed babies don't necessarily have as many bowel movements, but they should still have the same amount of typical wet diapers and about 1 to 2 dirty diapers a day. And 6 wet diapers on average is a good number. Kind of hard to keep up with, but if you have trouble with that, there are apps that help you monitor all of this too. I tend to think if you're already type A, apps can help you in the beginning, but be careful not to be so reliant on them that you don't pay attention to your baby's cues as well. If you have any questions about breastfeeding or formula feeding your baby, especially in those first few weeks, it's important to just ask them. Ask your pediatrician, ask a lactation consultant, even ask a dietitian, any healthcare provider that's on your team that can help assess your actual needs and situation. So that's it for today's video. We talked about newborn feeding basics, colostrum and stomach size, feeding frequency, what to expect, hunger and satiety cues, and then also how to know if your baby is getting enough. And that's all for today's video. But if you like this video or at least found it helpful, be sure to subscribe, of course. That's important, but I do have a day job, so I'm not getting paid by this. I would love to. I'm not opposed to extra money, but what I really, really would love is if you reach out to your insurance company, whether that's Blue Cross Blue Shield, United Healthcare, or Medicaid, whatever it is that services you and your family, and let them know that you want access to nutrition, medical nutrition therapy by registered dietitians. Make sure you can get coverage for a lactation consultant as well. You never know what your insurance covers. You also may not realize that if your insurance doesn't cover something that you find valuable, you as a consumer can request that. So my hope is that medical nutrition therapy by registered dietitians is covered by all insurances, and that lactation consultants can provide care on their own in the community too. So if you could reach out to your insurance companies, that would also be a huge plus. I'd love to hear more about your newborn feeding experience in the comments below, and of course, if you've got a question, leave it down below and I'll try to get to it in another video.